it's 11:30, so we'll get started, and I've been instructed to announce that this session is eligible for the continuing education credits. So those of you who want those need to see the two ladies back there with their hands waving, or one of them, there's two, either now or after the session to sign in, okay? Sorry, it's a little darker out there, but I did ask for that just so that the photographs would show better. But at least my transect shadings are showing up, so I think it'll be fine. So welcome. My name's Sandy Sorlien. I speak Transect as a first language, which is a strength and a weakness. I don't have a conventional planning background, so I have to rely on my planner friends to help with feedback when I'm explaining how the Transect works with coding, whether that is making sense for what they need to do. And I hope to get feedback from all of you after as well, and you can always find me in the hallways. And I hope we'll have some time for questions or discussion during the session too. After a certain point, I'll say, okay, yell. So just quickly, codes, and Andres gave quite a good talk about the coding aspect of the new urbanism for those of you who are here for that. We're talking about these three kinds of codes and other disciplines that can plug in to a transect-based system, but not building codes. Although health and safety certainly is addressed by new urbanist outcomes, walkability, eyes on the street, the population of public spaces with what SEPTED calls legitimate users, and all of that is certainly about safety. We'll try to address what we're talking about, but the basis I think is important to keep in mind is that transect zones, and you can think of them as ecological zones as opposed to the kind of zoning that separates, which Andres had also spoken about, that an ecological zone has symbiotic elements that support each other. So think of the transect zone as a habitat, and there are different types of transect zones for types of humans. And I'll be showing a lot of photographs from the Transect Collection Image Bank. We'll go on a walk through an urban transect, T3, T4, T5, T6. And keep in mind that a lot of the debate that we have in the new urbanism over transect zones, like what is this condition, is sometimes a simple, we're not quite speaking the same language in terms of, are we talking about what it is now or what we would like to code for the future? This kind of a diagram, you've probably seen plenty of these. This is a natural transect, a transect being simply a cut or a slice through the environment. Sometimes it's a path. If you do a stream transect, it might actually be a rope that's pulled across a stream and sampling is taken along that. So when we talk about a transect for the built environment, it's kind of a path or a cross-section, and we'll see kind of two ways of looking at that. But please notice the scale of this particular drawing, which has been used for quite a while to try and make that connection between environmentalism and the built environment. And that is, if you've been to barrier islands that are, these very skinny islands that may be less than a pedestrian shed across, less than a quarter mile or half mile for the whole shed, then you will see these different habitats. I mean, it can change rather rapidly. And so that's the scale at which we're looking at a neighborhood as well. Then introduce the built environment. And again, this scale it's a village, and you'll see that it's just a few blocks from the shore to the upland, right? This is, if you were at Emily's talk, she showed a regional transect and spoke about the regional transect of Patrick Geddes with all those tools that people used in different parts of the landscape. Of course, there could be a regional transect. However, these transect zones that we use for coding walkable neighborhoods are not, with the exception of T1 and T2, are not spread out across a regional scale. And you can see it in this drawing because you have the T2 and T1 going up sort of infinitely to the top of the mountain and as well out into the ocean, but the village itself is compact. And this is the famous Transect diagram, or one of them. They get tweaked now and again. And the 6 zones, and this is a systemizing of the idea of a transect of the built environment for the purposes of actually writing zoning codes and design codes. This is a model transect. It needs to be calibrated. And if you've heard this term calibration, you're not quite sure what that is, just means customizing. I mean, there's calibrating of the code. If you have a model code and you need to customize it for your place, you need to calibrate metrics for that, for your particular place, but also all kinds of customization, and I'll speak about a few of those things. Here's an example of the same kind of diagram, systemized, abstracted. Now, this is an abstraction, of course, but you see how Miami being so urban, with so many tall buildings in its urban core, that they have subzoned T6, the urban core zone, into several T6s. This Fayetteville transect by Dover Cole, note that this has 7 zones in it. So the T6, and it looks like a continuum. It's not necessarily a continuum in terms of what's on the ground. But you'll notice that they have two T6 zones. But it's much less urban, less dense than the Miami condition. It's a different place. Their urban core doesn't rise to 60 stories. So, and they clearly do not want it to, or they would be coding for it. This is, just happened to shoot this out, the airplane leaving Miami one day, and it's like, oh, look, there's the famous transect. This again, when this transect was discovered by the Dwani brothers, they were walking across their neighborhood, South Beach, and they're going, you know, these habitats are changing, and you know, this is kind of like an ecological, you know, a path that we would walk to sample the elements of urbanism in a walkable place. And also, unlike the abstracted diagram, you can see that the T-zones are kind of scattered a little bit. It's not necessarily what we call a fried egg section where, you know, the core of the community is in the middle and everything, you know, gets lower and lower until you go out. It doesn't necessarily happen that way. So when there's a waterfront, T6 may migrate there. Okay, you can see that good. So the 4 zones that I'm going to address the most are 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're within compact urban conditions. They're within neighborhoods, they're within villages, hamlets, although I've been told that hamlet is not a good word to use in Texas by my Texas friends, so we say Texas tiny town. So this village, and then TND, which stands for Traditional Neighborhood Development, this is a community unit type that is kind of a synonym for a village or an urban neighborhood. So that's why they're both on there. It's about that scale. And we don't see these urban T-zones, from the 30,000 feet. We need to go zooming in. This shows a little bit more than a pedestrian shed, again, that quarter-mile radius that's walkable. And your T3 and T5, many, many small towns are made up of only T3 and T5. Your main street area, T5, and houses. So this is a town like that. There may have been a little T4. I did plug a little bit in because the main street was getting a little typologically looser. I did get down on the ground for this one. And this scale and system translates into a very urban city. You have to find the neighborhoods of the city, not the neighborhood that's the core, that's the downtown, but a city of neighborhoods like Philadelphia that was mostly developed before the automobile. You'll find this very fine grain again, and the T5 corridor is slicing through there past Shunk Avenue at the diagonal. And that is a T4 condition that was evolving to T5, so now it's got a lot of retail frontages, shops, and restaurants. The CS, by the way, that you're seeing on these stands for Civic Space. And there's more than that, but I just label a few. But I just want you to see, this is, more than a pedestrian shed, but not much more being shown here, and this is quite the fine grain of distinction between habitats. And the purpose of that is so that there are different habitats for different types of people, or the same people at different stages of their life, so that they can walk to visit each other and age in community. Is a phrase you may have heard. Not just aging in place like you're stuck in this one indoor place, but that you could move to different conditions within your same community throughout your life changes. Now we'll talk a little bit about what a form-based code is. This little code that was distilled from a Transect-based code, the Smartcode, and then the Neighborhood Conservation Code into this little 5-page pocket code. Doesn't have any graphics, so it wouldn't fulfill the Form-Based Codes Institute's definition that form-based codes do communicate, at least in part, with graphics. But, they should. Whoever would like to try to add some graphics to this, I would appreciate it. But the idea that a form-based code addresses the form of the building, the lot, the block, the neighborhood, the whole community, the whole metropolitan area, and the region, that is really the essence of what a form-based code is. Because if you're not addressing the form, you may get those uses that Andres was picturing, but not in a form that increases value in your community and so forth. Now we're just going to take a walk. I'll try not to go too fast. I walk fast. I also talk fast. I was told by my friend from California last night that, because I'm from Philadelphia, I talk too fast. If anybody catches me doing that and you can't follow, do this like, when a car's going too fast through your neighborhood, like it's a transect violation and there are 12-foot wide lanes and they're going too fast, and do that, maybe I'll see you. So these descriptions are just, I wrote up some kind of everyday language descriptions, tried to keep the jargon out, which is sometimes difficult, but, and notice there are no names associated with these yet, because you can customize those names for your purposes. Try and imagine maybe a walk like this that you've taken in a small town or in an urban neighborhood to go and do an errand. And I'll show some from different places. This is just a block or two from the center where the city hall is, and some cafes and city offices in Old Town Leander in honor of this past winter. And this looks rural, and it is a road under there, not a street, but in T3 you can have a kind of rural feeling, yet it's compact. The lots are fairly small. These were 50 and 100-foot wide lots. And you can walk to higher transect zones for more mixed use in those places. So I just want you to feel, how we're moving from rural to urban, from zone to zone, or less urban to more urban. We have, somewhat deep setbacks, the common yard frontage. This is peeking at the end of that sidewalk. You see where Bob Dylan went to high school. You could also walk to the main street from there. You see in T3, you may have some driveways and parking in front, but it like this condition, have the parking set back a little bit from the facade so that it appears, the houses, that the humans in the house are welcoming you, not just the cars. Lots can be quite small. So, it's often difficult to get your head around what's the difference between suburbia, a residential subdivision, and T3. I mean, some people will equate the two. It's just a matter of, well, if there's a lot of it, or if it's separated from other zones, then, well, it's conventional residential sprawl. And that can be the case. But there are frontage differences a lot of times. Again, the frontages for humans, the porch, common yard. Very valuable neighborhood to live in. Oak Park being a town that's next to Chicago, not part of Chicago. This is classic, T3. Elements of, street, not very wide. You drive slowly here. It's very pedestrian friendly and compact. So a lot of people can walk to the higher zones. The houses can confront a pedestrian pathway instead of a street or road. Moving to T4. Notice language is relative. T3 was quieter. This is more populated. Getting usually more density. T4 is the messy zone where you'll have a mix of different dwelling types, different building types. And here, these are multifamily, but they're still houses. And so it can help to remove the stigma from multifamily in a place if they look like the houses that maybe the wealthy neighbor is living in. You can see by all the utility meters there how many apartments are in them. And a mix of attached, semi-detached, and detached. And you'll see a variety of setbacks, range of setbacks, not necessarily all lined up, but it can be messy. Delightful. Porches and stoops. You see the stoop in the distance. Attached. And it is hard to see context when I'm only showing you the pedestrian's eye view, but the pedestrian's eye view is very important to, your walk. Is this going to feel safe? Is it interesting? Is it beautiful? This is a good example for local calibration where you might see these very low porches very close to the street. If you were going to protect this character, and that's a question always to ask, well, I'm coding an existing place, and are we protecting it or are we evolving it? And if this is an element that you want to protect, then you measure and go out with your synoptic survey forms and get the get the dimensions that become the DNA for the code that you would write. Now, Steve Mouzon says, and I agree, that this is too close to the street for people to actually use it. And you can see no furniture on the porch. But this is a classic T4 in the middle of a city of about 30,000. And corner stores are typical of this habitat. But not every part of the country has that same tradition. You may work in places where they're more open to scattering such stores throughout the community. It's starting to get quite urban, but still you see the mix of types close to the street. And then Main Street area, the question is, and we could debate this endlessly, whether you want to use your T5 zone to encompass more than your Main Street, your retail shopping area, and some new urbanists do that. But I think you see when you get here, this habitat feels completely different. You'll get different kinds of people who will want to live here, or they may have to live here because it's less expensive possibly, but it's not always less expensive. And we're still only at about 3 stories, and all those changes in habitat don't have to do with the height and the density alone. There are a lot of different things. Setback is really important to that, and side setbacks. So obviously the more urban types of the attached, the row houses, the townhouses, that's gonna have a different feeling. But as soon as you introduce the mixed use, and that's fairly constant, like a Main Street, then you're gonna feel that. And some people will not live in those habitats, but they like to walk to them. They're useful. They're fun. There's a hotel on the other side. You can see how it's the tiny little Main Street, real short, 1 block, and you can see how it's getting T4-ish over there in the distance. Elements like the awnings are important in this habitat. If you're going to have awnings, they should be deep enough so that they actually are doing something to shade the windows and protect the pedestrian. And public space abutting the T5. Now this was 10 years ago. I don't know if maybe it's evolved to T6 around this public space. Somebody can tell me later. The best Dunkin' Donuts anywhere. See, it's about the form, not the use. See the red, white, and blue center line. Bristol has the best, supposedly the most famous anyway, 4th of July parade. So, but all year round they're red, white, and blue center line. Showing how if you code by stories, rather than a height level that a developer will try to hit every time, you'll get a nice varied roof line. So the 2-story building cadence there is higher than some of those 3-story ones farther down. And not too far from here. Arcade frontage, that's a very urban frontage that you'll find in south, southwest, and southeast. And we're getting to a more urban T5, and this is when new urbanists start arguing, well, this is T6. Well, is it T6 in New Orleans? So what is the context? What else is there? What's nearby? And what will serve you best in distinguishing these habitats from each other in your code? Like, why would it be a different zone? And do you need to subzone? And then you want to think about, what is the purpose of this zone? What's the role of the zone in the whole community? This is early in the morning. Again, 10 years ago, I apologize. Things might be different, but same spot in the evening. So this is one of the purposes and one of the roles of this habitat for residents and visitors. This is kind of a nuance of coding, but these are both of the town square, the courthouse square in Mason. And again, you see a variety of, well, it's only 1 to 2 stories on one side, and then on the other side, it's just the 1 story with the false fronts. It starts to get T4-ish maybe. If you wanted to make that distinction in a code, you could. But just a block off of their courthouse square, it was like this, and these are little businesses in them. So maybe this is one of the T4 zones, and the courthouse square is T5. You have to really walk around, study, look, what is the DNA? What is this place? What are the distinctions of this place? But I think you can feel that this habitat feels different from the other one. And you would analyze why that is. But this is, very typical Texas courthouses, towns, which I just love. And this was only last year. A lot of 1 story. And this is one of those things that the new urbanism may be coming around to because of the lean urbanism pushing for, not starting at such a high level of construction where some codes had 2-story minimums. Even I've seen 3-story minimums in some of the town centers. So that's quite a burden. And gee, how charming is this? So can it evolve? Is it successional? And then just to show that the transect can be applied in other countries. But what is the urban character that is there? What are the customs, and what do you want to preserve, and what do you want to evolve? And then T6. Most towns and small cities don't really have, and I'm talking again about the existing conditions, don't really have a T6 urban core. T5 would work just fine for coding. Again, it's not the use, it's the form. Walgreens is very good at behaving in an urban context. There are a lot of good ones. Certain frontages like this, a shop front with a lot of glass, important for your retail shopping street, of course. And so you'll see that in all of these T5, T6 pictures. And that's as high as Oak Park got. It's not like Chicago. Chicago would, if it were a transect zone, need several subzones like Miami, most likely. But there's certain elements that all good walkable places have in common. If you want to attract pedestrians, make signs that are not blaring across, a boulevard for cars, make friendly signs for pedestrians that they could see blade signs as they're walking down the street. And this is the T5, T6 famous street light that now we see everywhere that so many main streets are remaking their street furniture. Okay, now how do we plan this? How do we apply it? The pedestrian shed being a walk shed. This is a fixed metric in the sense that humans are pretty much the same size. Humans pretty much, there's variation, but not a lot, in how far people will walk for an errand or how far they'll walk for transit. So that's why the scale of how transect zones are allocated is something that doesn't vary that much. That it varies is important. For example, one time we were working in the Bahamas and people walked very, very slowly. And so the question is, do you make your pedestrian shed smaller when you're planning, or do you ask the people, are you willing to walk farther? Are you willing to spend more time walking? And ultimately, the team realized that they had to make the pedestrian shed smaller. But basically, not a lot smaller. A sixth of a mile. Can you see those? Yeah, so the pedestrian shed dotted lines. So here you have a 400-acre plus plan by placemakers, and this really helps to show that if you're scaling up and you're doing a larger area, you're planning each pedestrian shed accordingly. It's not like you're blowing everything up. Because then you're going to have a condition where the T3 people can't walk to T5 or they can't walk to Civic Space. They can't walk to, the edge of the community for real T1 natural zone. So one thing I want to point out here also, again with that fried egg issue, sometimes the T3 zone, I should say, used to be called in some new urbanist codes the edge zone. That's fine if your T3 is on the edge, but for a model code where you don't know where the T3 is going to be, it's not always on the edge. And if you look at the pedestrian shed to the right, it's bleached out here a little, but what's white there is T3, and that's in the middle of that pedestrian shed. And you don't always get a smooth continuum, going from one of these walkable zones to another. You may have this dramatic and thrilling kind of change between the edge of town, T5, and the T2. There's a silo out in the distance. This is some T1 natural area, quite close to that previous one. And again, you may be regulating this in a regional plan, or you may be regulating it in a zoning code. And these zones are intended for your use in municipal zoning code or private developments. T2, vast. You don't need T2 to be walkable. You can have roads through it that cars can go fast on. Have you ever experienced that? I'm sure. The transect of speed limits as you're coming into a town in agricultural country, where the speed limit's going from 70, 55, 45, 35, 25, and then back out again. Where there isn't sprawl, that kind of messes it up. T1 is for people. It's a habitat for people to use and enjoy. It just doesn't allow building. It can be vast. It can be a park. Usually is. Zooming in on this a little bit, just so you can see the key, although it's, again, a little bleached out. But in contrast to the previous image, T1 is coming into this community. So it can be coded in small amounts in your community. Or it could be called civic space. And the distinction that I would make to decide, well, do we want to call this T1 and just say no building, or do we want to call it civic space, is if it's designed and you're going to have other standards associated with it other than it's natural, we're just going to basically leave it and kind of take out the invasive species or whatever. But yeah, so that's a matter for your decision how your town will be handling it. So arguably, these falls coming through Ithaca are civic space. People use them. It would count towards your civic space allocation in for example, the Smartcode's standards. But it's pretty natural, and that part of it, they don't do anything with this except try and keep people out of it. This is the Wissahickon Valley Park in Philadelphia. Very popular. So, yeah, it's still a habitat for humans, and a lot of humans have to be near it. That's a prerequisite. That's why people live in Portland. It could be, again, here's an adjacency in Kentlands for those who may have visited there. And then some civic space is clearly civic space and not T1. So those zones that are civic are different from the transect zones. However, there can be a correlation. That is, a plaza that's all paved is a very urban type of civic space. And that belongs in the more urban habitats, the more urban T-zones, as opposed to a green or a greenway, maybe. This I'm just showing, again, the fine grain at which you get 2, 3, 4 transect zones per pedestrian shed. The larger circle is a long pedestrian shed. That's what you can use to assess how many of your rooftops are going to walk to transit. If it's rail transit, people will walk farther. Not just to a bus stop, but to rail or maybe BRT. And again, Leon Creer, who influenced the new urbanism from the beginning is showing, you know, the difference between blowing something up, just making it larger to cover a larger area, rather than replicating it, duplicating these walkable neighborhoods all over a city and ending up with a city of neighborhoods. Now, how would you use the pedestrian shed to figure out what to do? It's a planning tool. You may or may not be actually regulating with the pedestrian shed, but it can be referred to. It could be part of a definition of a community unit boundary. So you can assess what's going on in a few different ways. This is my neighborhood. The green is the ped shed around my house. So I can see what's within my 5 to 7 minute walk. And what's missing. What do I have to walk farther for? I could walk to my T5 because I'm willing to walk farther, but not everybody would be. They would get in their car instead, and a lot of my neighbors do that. This is obviously kind of monocultural neighborhood in the area. It's all duplexes, twin houses. And it's actually not bad. It has alleys and everything. You know, you look at it and you go, this is fine. Alleys, yay. But it's all residential, and they can only walk, and only some of them are going to walk, you know, up to some of where the T5 is. And then another thing to look at is, where's the center of your town? What do people consider the center? Even if it's a lengthy corridor like this one is, Ridge Avenue, where are the nodes that people will flock to in their cars that you want to make sure that they're able to walk if they want to? And so, you know, where can you intensify, densify, make the streets safer, and so on. I mentioned that the pedestrian shed is a planning tool. The community unit is a regulatory tool in the model Smartcode, and varieties of this are used in other codes that are not based on the Smartcode. So whatever you call this unit, it is important for the outcome of having a complete neighborhood that has. That's not to say everything everything you need is in your neighborhood. Your job may not be in your neighborhood, but that there are enough useful things and you know, the playgrounds and parks and everything to walk to that you are not in your car all day, going from place to place. So these little acronyms, CLD, TND, RCD, this is to get. They're in the Smartcode, and those of you who looked at it know jargon. But it's to get people away from their preconceived ideas of what, well, if it's neighborhood, then it's like what I'm thinking of as a neighborhood. So just to get very technical and precise about it, these are rules for these particular community units. And in an attempt, because it's a little confusing in terms of scale from the diagram, where all these zones are the same size in this diagram. We've tried to come up with a lot of different ways to indicate that generally T2 and T1 are much larger areas outside of communities. And so these little tents that are coming over may be helpful, although some people think they look like mountains in the distance, which really isn't helpful. So, I alluded earlier to arguing about the names. These are the normative model names in the model Smartcode that is where the model Transect is most fully realized in terms of all the tools to plug into it. These are the names that are used. You don't have to use them. Special district is for different things that are not necessarily codable by the elements you would be coding with your transect zones. So here are just a bunch of different possible names. You know, you can name them a specific place, name them, you know, what they are, Raspberry Flats, or whatever your main street's name is that you might be getting a code overlay. form-based code, this is kind of a summary of what I spoke about earlier. Just here are a couple of resources for you. And again, the form, and note that watershed is on there too. When Andres was talking about how environmentalists and urbanists are at each other's throats, well, are polite, but are adversaries, shouldn't be at the watershed scale. The more compact our development, the more open lands, forests, the more pervious surface and wetland is saved. So form, just don't forget about character, and you can feel that. It's form at the lot scale, same use, same company, different form. One for cars, one for pedestrians. Form at the block scale, what we have is 6-lane thoroughfare retail, 2 different forms. One for the car, one for the pedestrian. And losing a few lot lines there, but I think you get the idea. Same number of dwelling units, same size parcel. This was an exercise done to show that when you make the community compact walkable, you are saving a lot of open land. And then think about it, could you make all those T-zone habitats happen on the one on the left or the one on the right? You know, where do you see different size lots, different price points to get in the community, different living arrangements, living experiences? You want to live on the edge of T3, looking out over the farmlands. Where can you do that? And then the scale of the region, sectors are similar to like in a future land use plan where you know, you're planning at quite a large scale. Now, it could be within a municipality, and then you as a municipal planner, if you are one, would have control there. It's a lot of times the regional problem is coordinating jurisdictions. By the way, Ithaca is working on that right now. The town of Ithaca and the city of Ithaca are 2 different entities, and they're coordinating a transect-based plan now, so that'll be interesting to see. But a lot of times you can do it within. The form of the region being, perhaps we imagine something like this, connected by rail. Oh, it says hamlets, I mean tiny towns. And then here's an example of a plan that was done for Leander, Texas, where you can see pedestrian sheds, just to give you the scale and, as a planning tool. The red one being around the transit stop, the light rail that goes out there. And the sectors, so here we have a transect at a larger scale, these different sectors. You know, the S1, let's see what we end up calling them, you know, S1, S2, S3. The existing old town where I showed you that house earlier is down in the lower left, S3. And there would be rules in a unified code like the model Smartcode, or in this case, they adopted a Smartcode in 2005. They had, and it was revised recently. There are rules for what you can do within sectors. They didn't originally have a sector plan, and now they do. That's what, when Andres was talking about you have to allow the bad stuff too, it would be something like this where, okay, we're allowing the bad stuff in another part of this municipality. We're making the option available to use the Smartcode or a transect-based code within one of these sectors. And then a couple of the sectors, it's mandatory that they have to plan according to the, so that's the planning stage, and then, you know, actually creating a zoning code from those plans has occurred in a couple of parts of that same area. So now you see those nice purple colors that show up on a lot of transect-based plans, ranging from, you know, T3, T4, T5, and then the dark one that's a lot of T6 right there, right around the transit stop. This outline is available at transect.org and shows the nesting relationship. So you have regional sectors or municipal sectors on the left. Then you have the community units like the CLD, TND, RCD, which are your communities, your neighborhoods that can be replicated all over a big city. They don't have to be only applied in a small area. And then the T-zones don't come in until after. And you see the T1 and T2 at the top kind of away from those. They can be outside the compact urban area. And this is all important for, thoroughfare planning, obviously, to treat thoroughfare design differently when you get into the compact urban area. And I know Rick Hall and many others have been working on this a long time. So what does a form-based code look like, other than the pocket code that's all text? And I'm sure you've seen these, but pictures and words that should tell the story the clearest. And this is from Narberth, Pennsylvania, form-based code that's based on one of our model codes, the Neighborhood Conservation Code, that a municipal planner just took it and ran with it, and we love to see that. You can plug in, you have these transect zones. There are all kinds of tools made to plug in, like the sign module, and so this was plugged into that one. And people ask, okay, form, we get that now. What about uses? You'll get this at your public meetings and so on. Yes, uses. What is the character of the habitat? You evaluate all these things. The intensity of the use is what you want to look at in a transect-based system. So this is one table from the Smartcode, and it shows very basic general categories, and it would be lovely if we could just use this, wouldn't it be? Then you could have a lot of adaptive reuse. So residential lodging, office, retail, and as an example, and you notice the black squares that are common throughout transect-based codes that are based on the Smartcode. You take one of those general functions, lodging, and it's just the intensity of it that could change across the transect, right? So you've all seen bed and breakfast in T3, right? And T4. So maybe you say, only up to 3 bedrooms, or whatever the intensity is you want to cap it at. In T4, T5, the same community, you could have inns allowed, and then in T6 of the same community, well, these aren't the same community, but this is Charleston, a full-service hotel, restaurant, the whole thing, bar. So same use, different intensity. However, use is use, not naive about this. There are pages and pages and pages of use tables where, everything is distinguished between, a barber and a hairdresser and a nail salon for hands and one for feet, and I don't even know, but there's so many uses in some of these codes. The Smartcode did go ahead and transect base a one-pager, so this one's more detailed, breaking down more uses. Let's see, time. Oh, you'll have to talk to me in the hallway because I'm going to run up against the end of the time. Just quickly, subzoning. This is from Opticos code for Cincinnati. And this is a tremendous code to look at because the subzoning is really interesting. And you'll see that the T5 actually, there are a lot of T5 zones. I'm sure that's hard to read, so I would just send you to it. City of Cincinnati form-based code, but it is transect-based. Several T3 zones, several T4, T5. Where we get into nuances, and this may be a little on the advanced side for those of you who are just learning about the transect for the first time. You look at this and you go, whoa, really urban. Douglas Dwani, who was one of the discoverers of the urban transect, I probably shouldn't even use air quotes, but one of the discoverers of the urban transect. He saw this picture, he said, absolutely T5 in every way, T4 in every way. This is T4 in every way. And then we had another very experienced new urbanist say, well, that would be T6 in my town. That's very intense. That's if you're looking at height and density only. Also consider, the frontage type. It's a residential frontage type. This is, you can't really tell, but this isn't an entire block of this. There's several blocks of it. Are you going to call that T5 your Main Street area, or is that a markedly different habitat? Does it need a different zone from where you have retail frontages and a lot of pedestrian activity, a lot of mixed use? Just another example, this is very close to Walnut Street in Philadelphia. This is Delancey Place. And again, it's 4 or 5 stories. It's very urban, but it's very quiet. You can do density in a habitat that the people who say, oh, I don't want to live in that busy, crazy, loud place. You can do it. Just don't mix it all up together. I think that's a mistaken conception of the new urbanism, that mixed use is everywhere. No, new urbanists use the transect. Mixed use isn't everywhere in the same intensity that it would be in a town center or urban core. So these are just some examples of what you might subzone for. This kind of thing where you have a mostly residential, you have houses, but you're going to allow some shops in them. You might call that T4 open function from that function table. Another example of doing that, this is right on Yarmouth's Main Street, but it's not attached, it's not very urban, it's a loose, small town, very common kind of Main Street. I love this. Let's make all the garages into little shops. So again, you can kind of do fine-grain, fine-tuning this T4, but do you want to make some of it T4 open so people can do this by right? And frontages, again, on the right, those transect numbers coordinating in the model code, and these are things that you would go through if you were calibrating a model code. Read this text. Does this describe the kind of thing that, the kinds of frontages that you have in your place? You need to use your own DNA when you're customizing or writing from scratch a code. And here's where we have 5 minutes, and if anybody wants to yell, like, because I can't really see hands, but, and talk about, some of the conditions that you're seeing, which way would you code it? And again, it is about the context of the whole pedestrian shed, and the whole community. Of course, within a municipal zoning code, you can't have different standards for the same zone in different parts. So you got to call it something else. So that's where the subzoning comes into play if you want to get quite fine grain about it. Or you could not be fine grain. You could just put T4 in different spots all over a large city and say, you guys, you can do anything that's allowed in T4. If you don't want to, make those areas kind of either protect or evolve their particular character. The geographic center. And so we don't know just by looking at one photograph which zone. We have to ask Rob Studeville, who lives in Ithaca, like, is this your T3 or your T4? Is this part of your T3 or a part of your T4? So anybody have questions or anything on any of these images, feel free to jump in. We're almost at the end. These are twins in Pennsylvania and Mid-Atlantic. There are a lot of what may be called duplexes elsewhere, and they're called doubles in Britain. We call them twins, a twin house. So you get double the density for houses. John Anderson's project in Chico. So these types overlap. You have building types that can be found in 2 or 3 different zones. So there's this kind of smoothing maybe, or the nuances. It's not necessarily hard edges. Sometimes there are hard edges. T4 end of their Main Street, which gets much more urban towards the right, but it's a nice little transition to the T4 around the corner. I mean, look at this and go, well, okay, it has retail frontages, shop fronts, but again, on the left there's a detached dwelling of some kind on the left, and it's transitional areas. They're exciting. It's more mixed use happening. And one nice thing about the Transect is it is successional. If you wanted to upzone, upcode after 10 years, after 20 years, it is possible to just change the zone to the next higher and then let it rip. It's kind of designed that way. Stoop frontages, not so good for retail, but, it's evolving, it's happening in existing places. I showed that Manning on Main Street before. This is the far end of it where, you see a lot of row houses with the stoops. It's included in a T5 habitat. If you want to make sure your main street is, or your courthouse square, your town square, is got a really consistent shopping frontage, you can code that separately. You could have T5 where you're allowing all these different frontages, but then maybe for 2 blocks you say mandatory shop front to keep that continuous, because if it's broken up too much by a bunch of houses like that, people will stop walking. And then this is a county seat. It's a fairly large town. I mean, it's still a small town, but it's a large town, small city, I guess you could say. So this could be their T6, borderline. Again, you just want to figure out the role of this area. And this goes for blocks and blocks. It's quite urban. Here you can see a condition that you could say is T5. This, again, 10 years ago. And then obvious T6 just adjacent. So if you want to preserve this area in the foreground, T5. If you want to allow it all to go up, T6. So resources for you. Model codes available here. And those are the scales that each of those would address. And you'll be able to get this presentation online later, so you can look. Form-Based Codes Institute, that's their website. Here are 3 codes that these are not model codes, these are adopted. So Mary Madden sent me the 2 on the outside, and then the Cincinnati one I showed by Opticos. This is an image bank that's available for you. All the photographs, and a lot of them are in this presentation, organized by Transect Zone, and there's sections for thoroughfares and civic space and so forth, and that's available free for educational purposes. So that can help sometimes. Basic decisions when you're going about, what are we going to do? Form and type are all over new urbanist codes. Style and materials, not necessarily. That's where you may run into a lot of resistance to your trying to put forth a new code. So you can't tell me, this is aesthetics. Well, the more you can defend things on the grounds of health and safety, like pedestrian-oriented frontages and populated public spaces, and slow traffic, all those things, obviously, then the code is not going to be seriously challenged. Okay, and that is my final slide, because I believe this is the most important rule we can have in a code, which is put the off-street parking in the back. So thank you very much.